And we are ready to go. So, hello, everybody, and welcome to our March Info Night. We're going to be discussing depressive and bipolar disorders tonight. Before getting going, I do just want to give a bit of a trigger warning. It's important when discussing depression and bipolar disorders to talk about suicide, which I know is a very heavy and personal topic for a lot of people. Some aspects of the discussion surrounding suicide also include topics of self-harm and self-injury. This discussion may be very triggering for some of y'all, so I wanted to make sure I gave you a heads up. Please feel free to take a break if you need to. I totally understand. Take care of yourself. I'm also going to have a list of some resources at the end of this presentation that I highly recommend you access if you feel like it would help you. There are some terms I want to go over before we get going today. Where's my mouse? There's my mouse. Anhedonia, first of all, is a word that describes a general lack of interest in things. It feels like apathy with a bit of executive dysfunction mixed in, so you kind of lose your appetite, your interest in things you previously enjoyed, and really it's just the inability to feel joy. I also want to make sure we're clear on the difference between hypo and hyper. Hypo is less than the norm, hyper is more than the norm. So in the case of hypomania, it would be a manic state that is to a lesser degree than a typical manic state. We're going to be talking more about what a manic state entails later in the presentation. I also want to discuss some medical terms, starting with selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. This is a class of medication that allows the neurotransmitter serotonin to stay in between the brain cells to give it a better chance of actually acting upon the brain. I'm going to have a diagram later on in my talk to give you a better idea of what I mean. And therapy is a term that many of us are familiar with, but I want to discuss what therapy is for the purposes of our discussion today. Talk therapy is a form of treatment that can be administered by qualified professionals, including licensed social workers, clinical psychologists, and some psychiatrists. And finally, ideation versus intent when it comes to discussing suicidal thoughts. Excuse me. Ideation describes somebody who thinks about suicide in an abstract way, more wanting their suffering to end than actually wanting to die. Intent means that they have a plan that they're going to carry through. Both of these forms of suicidality are harmful for the person experiencing them, but they're at different danger levels. Kind of the difference between a watch and a warning, if you know weather terms. And most of my discussion will hinge around the criteria of depression, so I am going to be discussing major depressive disorder first. The symptoms of major depressive disorder are very important to recognize. To be diagnosed with MDD, you need to be experiencing at least 5 of the following symptoms, one of which has to be depressed mood or anhedonia. The other symptoms include fluctuations in weight, whether that's loss or gain, changes in your sleep habits, whether that's sleeping too little or too much, being super restless or super sluggish, increased fatigue, feelings of worthlessness and guilt, brain fog, and recurrent thoughts of death. These thoughts can be abstract and in general, just kind of thinking about the afterlife or people that you've known that have died, or they can be in the form of suicidal ideation or intent. Many people also experience physical symptoms such as body aches and digestive problems, but these are quite understudied at the moment. I also want to touch on some of the statistics associated with depression. About 4.7% of Canadians over the age of 15 meet criteria for major depressive disorder, and around 1 in 10 adults will experience depression in their lifetime. Roughly twice as many women are diagnosed with depression than men, though that could be due to a large number of factors. My personal guess is a combination of the whole systemic patriarchy oppressing women thing, plus the way that we're socialized from birth to deal with our feelings. It is partially because of this that suicide rates are roughly 3 times higher in men than in women. Thankfully, there are a lot of different options for treating depression. It's important to remember that just as every person is different, every person will have different experiences with every treatment. So it's important to ensure that your approach is individualized enough for you. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is a form of talk therapy that uses mental reframing to try and put one's emotions or cognitive distortions back into perspective. This can be through mantras, reminders, or frameworks that you use to approach a situation. Dialectical behavioral therapy, or a DBT, is a modified form of CBT that helps people to apply all kinds of coping mechanisms in order to manage your depression. One of the most useful teachings of DBT, in my opinion, is distress tolerance, where the patient practices coping skills in advance so that by the time they hit a crisis point, they're more able to help themselves. Distress tolerance gives you the space to think through your actions in an achievable way instead of acting just out of crisis. Lots of people also take medications to help balance their brain chemistry. Meds won't cure your depression, but they will get you to a better baseline so you can actually apply your healthy coping skills. Depression can be really insidious with how it invades your mind and your energy, and meds often give you a chance to fight instead of being unable to get up again, if we're going to be using a bit of a boxing metaphor. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, are one of the most commonly prescribed classes of medications used to treat depression. I know I mentioned them before, but it is a bit confusing without a visual if you're not familiar with a little bit of anatomy. So I found this handy dandy diagram. The little bubbles labeled synaptic vesicles there hold the serotonin with little green dots in them. When the nerve signal gets to the end of the brain cell, so coming from the top down there, these little bubbles of serotonin get scooted to the very end of the neuron so they can get released into the little gap between brain cells. That's the synaptic cleft. They hit the receptors of the next neuron and they keep the signal going. Brain cells hate waste, so if all the serotonin doesn't attach to a receptor, the first cell will absorb it back up again so it can be reused, but some people just don't get enough serotonin to function if this happens. And an SSRI blocks the extra from being absorbed so quickly, so more of it can attach to receptors and keep working. And finally, literally everybody I know hates to hear this, but exercise is really good for depression if you're able to make it happen. That doesn't always have to mean going to the gym, though it can. It really just means moving your body in a way that feels good. You know, for me, that's karate. For my sister, that's walking her dog. For some people, it's stretching or doing some weights or dancing. To quote Legally Blonde, exercise gives you endorphins, and endorphins make you happy. It is a very effective treatment if you're able to manage it. I want to move on to dysthymia now, another type of depressive disorder. It's very similar to major depressive disorder, but there are a few key differences. In the last edition of the DSM, it's the Bible of Diagnostic Criteria for Mental Illness. It was called chronic depression. To qualify for dysthymia, you need to be experiencing most of the symptoms for MDD for over 2 years. Some people call it a less severe form of depression, but I would like to contest that. I'd almost call dysthymia and MDD two sides of the same very crappy coin. One is acute and one is chronic, but they're both pretty debilitating and horrible. Another form of depression that gets touched on less than it should is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or PMDD. Lots of big words this presentation, don't mind me. PMDD starts up the week before your period, and to be diagnosed, it has to happen roughly 5 periods in a row, so that's about 5 months in a row. PMDD comes with intense mood swings, anhedonia, brain fog, fatigue, feeling like your emotions are out of control, and much more severe premenstrual symptoms. So these can include localized pain in the form of cramps, issues with your bowels, headaches, chest pain, and so on. And PMDD isn't often acknowledged as a legitimate form of depression, though it does impact a lot of people. Bipolar disorder is another mood disorder that impacts a lot of people, so I did want to focus for a little while on it. The defining characteristics of bipolar disorder are manic and depressive episodes to the extent where it used to be called manic depressive disorder. Mania can be kind of hard to put into perspective unless you've witnessed it, but I will try my best. It comes with an abnormally elevated mood and often a sense of grandiosity, like you're better than everyone else, like a god or a monarch. People also rarely sleep during manic episodes, functioning fine on 3 or less hours. Many people also experience racing, fast-paced thoughts and are extremely distractible. There's also a lack of understanding of consequences, so a lot of people in manic states go on uncontrolled spending sprees or they engage in a lot of risky behavior. People in manic episodes also move around a lot more than they would otherwise. Like they're on the go, they can't sit still. Once again, depressive episodes take up all the symptoms of MDD. So that's the whole down, exhausted, lack of interest in things that we all know of, and hate. There are a few subtypes of bipolar disorder. Type 1 includes classic manic depressive episodes, whereas type 2 is where you have hypomanic and depressive episodes. This is a lesser manic state, but it is still noticeably manic. Cyclothymia is a form of bipolar disorder that is less severe in the extent to which the person experiences mood swings. So they would experience shorter periods of hypomania and dysthymia. The treatments for bipolar disorder are very similar to those for depression. So this includes talk therapy and antidepressant medications. A lot of people also take mood stabilizers, which kind of take the edge off the huge swings so you can use your coping skills more effectively. Some people also take antipsychotic medications. It really just depends on your individual brain chemistry and what you need. So let's take a breather for half a sec, yeah? Statistically, we all know someone who struggles with these things, or we've been there ourselves. It can be pretty heavy stuff, right? It can be really hard to watch your loved one going through something like this, and it's hard going through it yourself. So since I did discuss a little bit about suicide, I wanted to give you guys something actionable you could do to help instead of just knowing the symptoms of these illnesses. These are some of the warning signs you can keep an eye out for in your loved ones. They may begin giving away belongings, or they may begin acting very differently than they did before. A lot of people also withdraw socially, so they'll stop answering texts or going out, and some people will begin acting very recklessly. Changes in eating habits are also important to keep an eye on, as well as discussing death and dying more than they did before. Again, this could just be in the form of philosophical pondering, or it could sound like they want to join a relative of theirs that has passed on, or it may be obvious suicidal ideation. You'll also want to see if they've been kind of letting go of their hygiene or grooming. So for example, if they're not showering or doing laundry, that kind of thing. Care tasks are also important to note. Maybe they're unable to do the dishes or clean their living space like they usually do. Please also look out for new injuries. That could be a sign of self-harm if it's repetitive or systematic, like there's a very measured approach to how they appear. And if you're looking for some coping skills for yourself, here's a bit of a list, though I do want to remind you all that I'm not a medical professional. This isn't medical advice. These are just some things that could help you if you're feeling down. Engaging in comfort media is always a good idea, whether that's your favorite sitcom or maybe a nostalgic cartoon, as well as listening to music. Baking is awesome. It gets you moving and you're rewarded with delicious food at the end. Maybe you can trick yourself into doing the dishes. That's a win in my books. Exercise is great if you can manage it, or even just spending a little bit of time outside, maybe sitting out with a book. Talking to your loved ones is also a great idea. I personally recommend spending time with animals if you're able. For me, that looks like cuddling with my dog, but some people it looks like horseback riding or bird watching or volunteering at a shelter. A lot of people also find journaling helpful. This isn't an exhaustive list, but it is a pretty good start. And today we are so lucky to have a wonderful guest speaker with us. I'm thrilled to introduce my sister, Megan Colpitz, who's kind enough to be sharing her experiences as a teacher with us. Take it away, Meg.
Hi, everybody. Speaking of spending time with animals, my dog is making it very clear that I am spending time with her right now. So I'm sorry for any dog-related background noises there are. Now she's giving me a death glare because she knows I'm talking about her. So hi, I'm Megan Colpitz. I'm a grade 5 teacher with the Calgary Board of Education, and I have been an educator for the past 5 years. My passion in education comes from literacy and student support, and I feel like in the last 2 years of the pandemic, student mental health has come to the forefront of most educators' practices. When we look at a broad term like depression from a teacher's perspective, it can be really hard to know how to best support our students. There can be a very stereotypical perspective of what depression looks like, and I find that in my practice that relying on the stereotype, we will miss a large body of students who will need additional support. So in the classroom, depression can look like poor concentration, lack of motivation and or focus. So this can take many different forms. But students look like they're really reluctant to engage in starting or continuing tasks, or they're unsure of how to start a task. This can also mean something like engaging in behavior that is less than ideal in a classroom, or taking a really long time to set up their learning materials. There can also be a lot of instances where students will give up easily. This is due to a lack of confidence. This one is a little easier to see because you will notice that students will say stuff like, I can't do that, or I'm dumb, or something, which should never be something that a child thinks about themselves. There can be forgetfulness and indecision, and there can be a difficulty of thinking clearly. So students may look like they've lost their train of thought or may seem like they're getting off task frequently. It might be that their brain is going through kind of a crisis for a child in terms of depression, and that they are honestly managing the best that they can. So if you were to give this list that I just talked about to some people, these symptoms seem to have a lot in common with ADHD or anxiety. So giving a proper diagnosis is not something that a teacher can do, but instead what as educators, what we can do is provide observations or concerns to parents or guardians, which will hopefully get the child the support they need from a professional. So we have a couple of guidelines in my classroom that might be a great starting point for anyone who works with vulnerable populations, but I'm always looking for better and more effective ways to be the best advocate for my children as possible. So these are guidelines that I think are easily adaptable for anyone with depression. I find that having this framework in my classroom opens up that conversation for other adults who might be in my classroom, or talking about it with children's parents or guardians as well. So the first rule is your feelings are valid, no exceptions. So many students have a preconceived notion that their feelings are not big enough or important enough. I don't know where this comes from. I'm really lucky to work with incredibly supportive parents who are very mindful and very cognizant of their children's needs, but it is something that needs a lot of support from adults. So the important thing to remember that if it is serious enough for the person who is feeling those feelings, then it's important, period. We need to understand that we never know a child's full experience, and that through validating how a child feels, we can build a more easily trusting and supportive relationship with them. So rule number 2, which is I think my personal favorite, is having what we call a safe adult in all major spaces of your life. This is something that I think is really easily adaptable for adults as well. And so we just call it a safe adult with the children so that they don't think they can just pick their best friend, but an adult who might have access to more resources or might just even have more life experience to help support that child. So having a safe adult can look very different for every child. Children in my classroom know this language so well that they're prompted to choose at least one adult at home and one at school who they feel like is someone they can trust. This can be hard for children with depression, as they sometimes struggle with identifying their emotions or understanding why they might need that extra social emotional support. But I've got to the point in my own classroom where all my students know that I'll be asking them who their safe adult is at school when they're feeling a big emotion. And just as an aside about big emotions, they look different for children than they do for adults. Big emotions for children are really hard to understand and usually looks like emotional dysregulation, regardless of what that big emotion may be. That is either on the positive or the negative side. Usually big emotions are confusing and sometimes frightening for the child. In my experience, there's also a lack of nuanced ideas for children to properly label their emotions, which is frustrating when children are being asked how they feel when mental health is a concern. I don't have the experience to speak with other about other vulnerable populations to know if the big emotion rule that I see with children is the same in other populations as well. But going back to the safe adult, my job as the primary teacher for a lot of my students is not to hope that every child chooses me as their safe adult, although honestly, it feels incredible to know that you have a child's trust for something that is very difficult for them, but to provide the space or opportunity for students to know that I will help them, that I will help connect them with their safe adult. So if one of my children feels like they need to talk to our gym teacher instead, who is also amazing and fabulous, my job isn't to make that child feel same, but instead celebrate that, one, they were able to identify their safe adult, and two, they were able to ask for help from who they feel like could help them. So then my job is to connect with the gym teacher and make that happen for that child. And that also shows what an advocate for their mental health can look like. Rule number 3 is everyone is included always. So children need support understanding what body language and offhand comments can look and sound like to others. And frankly, adults sometimes need this support too. One of the ways that this is supported within my classroom is when we are making groups or doing different activities. Sometimes student feels like they are always a second choice to others in the classroom, never a first choice. It's even harder for children with depression who sometimes struggle with understanding their value in the classroom or in their lives, period. Where did I just go? Sorry. And they have troubles putting themselves out there because of it. Having a group randomizer app is always a good idea. But again, my lens is strictly through teaching and education with children. I don't know how this would work with other vulnerable populations that we might be supporting in other careers. Coaching children what their body language looks like and when they sit at their desk and don't get up to make groups is one way that this can be navigated. Another way is to explain to children when they have these big disappointed sighs when they're not partnered with their classroom bestie can be interpreted as disappointment in who they actually were partnered with and understanding the aspect of that. If I could wish for one thing for all my students who are struggling with mental health, it would be to get help from a professional. I do have great relationships with my students and I am a major support for them. It is not my job to act like a mental health expert. It's going to be really hard with working with a vulnerable population because you care so deeply for the people you serve and the work that you do. It is important, therefore, to instill getting a value of what support is and connecting with resources for the people that you serve. I know that I'm preaching to the choir here, as you've chosen to spend your Tuesday nights listening to an idea information night to better your own practices, but I do think it is worth saying nonetheless. You're connecting with the idea of supporting vulnerable populations with depression. There are so many incredible people out there who do amazing work. My first suggestion is always Dr. Jody Carrington, who has so much to offer the world. I follow her on Instagram, but I know her Facebook also has a lot of great resources, and she has a couple of books that are more education focused as well, but she is a child psychologist who's also done a lot of work with emergency responders and their families as well. Her favorite quote is, "We are all just walking each other home." And it's one that's especially impactful when thinking about depression. She has a ton of great content on her social media pages that's for free that can help you connect with topics of mental health in really amazing ways. And that's about all I have. So thank you, Kaylee, so much for your time.
Thank you so much for talking with us, Meg. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I know a lot of people who want to become teachers, and all of your advice is really applicable to different populations. So I do really appreciate it. I have another video for you all. You know how I like finding all kinds of sources for you. Sorry, I'm having some tech troubles. That was weird. This one's 3 minutes long, and it's on a concept this guy calls the long goodbye. I found it really insightful and really impactful, so I wanted to share it with you.
Let's talk about the long goodbye. For most of my life, I have struggled with depression. I was depressed in large part because I so often chose to see life events in terms of loss. What do I mean? I'll show you. On the outside here, I'm celebrating my best friend's wedding, but on the inside, I'm mourning the loss of our youth. This wasn't the day that I started traveling to DC to attend law school. This was the day I said goodbye to my childhood home. This wasn't a great day with my DC friends before I moved back to the Midwest. This was the day that I said goodbye to perhaps the greatest group of friends I would ever have. This isn't a picture of my son and me on the day my daughter was born. It's a picture of me realizing that I will probably never experience the joy of new fatherhood again. This isn't a picture of my daughter on her first day of school. It's a picture from the day that I realized that my little girl wasn't so little anymore. This isn't a picture of me in Arizona riding horses with my kids on a beautiful spring day. This is a picture from a day that I spent worrying about my own mortality and wondering how many more days like this I had left. This isn't a picture of my son's first day at college. It's a picture of the day that my roommate and best friend moved away. When you view all of your life events in the context of loss, your life becomes nothing more than a very, very long goodbye. Every day brings you more and more loss, and every day simply brings you one step closer to your grave. So if you know someone who's depressed or suicidal, don't necessarily think that they hate life. In fact, they may love life very much. They simply may not be able to cope with a prevailing and perpetual sense of loss. For me, the long goodbye lasted until I chose to see life differently. It wasn't easy to reprogram my outlook on life. And yeah, there are days that still cause me to struggle. But now I do my best to see both the goodbyes and the hellos. Yes, I had to say goodbye to my high school friends, but new friends were right around the corner. And when I said goodbye to those friends, I soon said hello to the greatest loves of my life. And when I said goodbye to their infancy, I said hello to basketball games, Cub Scouts, marching bands, trips to the hospital, trips back to the farm, horse rides, and more horse rides, and card games, and wild nights on the boat. And yes, eventually they moved away. But we remain together. We say hello in our old haunts. We say hello in far-flung places. And I have said hello to a new love. And with her I've said hello to new adventures. And hello to a much bigger family. And I've said hello to new endeavors that seemed impossible a few years ago. Don't limit your life to loss. Life is limitless.
I really appreciate the way he framed that. I think that's something that's very important to keep in mind when you're considering people that you love that have depression. I also wanted to make sure I gave you a list of resources if you need them. The Distress Center is an amazing resource with a 24/7 hotline. I think they do absolutely phenomenal work. Woods Homes is a mental health support organization for children, and Calgary Seniors is a resource you can access to get help for the elders in your life. Depression is one of the most overlooked neurological conditions in older people. The Trevor Project is specifically for people in the LGBTQ plus community, and this mental health coalition link will take you to a list of resources put together by a variety of Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color. Everyone from different social groups will experience mental illness differently. That's just part of how mental illness is socially constructed. So it's important to remember that it's okay to ask for help from people who've been there, who understand, who know what it's like to kind of be in your shoes. That's allowed. It's okay to ask for specific help. And as a matter of fact, the organization we're going to be supporting this time is the one and only Calgary Distress Center. They provide tangible community support with their highly trained volunteers and staff, and they're truly an invaluable resource. They're so integral to our city, and I am truly grateful that we have a service like this in our city. Our next info night is going to be on one of the following topics: epilepsy, hemophilia, diabetes. I changed my script. Diabetes or multiple sclerosis. Vote at the link or the QR code to let us know what you want to discuss. Please, you're not in a rush. Our communications director will be sending out the survey link very, very soon, so you're not in a rush to do it right now immediately. I also wanted to give you all a friendly reminder that we really need junior execs, so please get in touch soon. We would love to hear from you. There's also a handful of awareness days coming up that I want to mention. It is Liver Health Month, and today actually is International Women's Day. It is also World Glaucoma Week right now, and Purple Day for Epilepsy is on March 26th. And really, just remember, y'all, deep breath. It's going to be okay. It's okay to seek support. It's okay to need support. It's okay to struggle, and it's okay to admit that you're not okay. This video fills me with all kinds of love and hope, and I hope it does the same for you. You're never truly alone.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. Thanks so much for always being the light.
Sometimes we all need a reminder from a fuzzy little green guy that you are the light. It's going to be okay. So thanks so much for attending tonight, and let's all thank Megan once again for sharing her experiences and her advice with us. You can get in touch with us at the club below. There's our email, our Instagram, and our website. And does anyone have any questions for Megan or I?